Good morning. It's Wednesday, March 26th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 537 days old. I'm Natalie Ecanow, FDD Senior Research Analyst, filling in for Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Our guest today is John Mirisch, who formerly served as the mayor of Beverly Hills. But it's not all palm trees and sunshine for John. He's been closely tracking the threat posed by Qatar, particularly in the United States. And like us here at FDD, he's concerned. Last week, Mr. Mirisch sat down with Jonathan Schanzer to discuss this two-faced, terror-supporting emirate. Stay tuned for this John-on-John conversation coming up in a few short minutes. Israel's Channel 12 dropped a bombshell yesterday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have been warned more than once that Hamas's late military chief Mohammed Deif was skimming Qatar's Gaza aid. We're talking about as much as $4 million per month. Netanyahu's office denied receiving any such warnings. Meanwhile, Israeli authorities continue to investigate former Netanyahu aides for allegedly raking in Qatari cash. I'm not going to wager what Netanyahu did or did not know, or who from his office did or did not pocket funds from Qatar. But here's what I do know. Qatari money is everywhere. It almost always appears strategic, but it's not always clean. Back in December 2022, Belgian authorities uncovered a Qatari bribery scheme at the heart of the European Parliament, involving suitcases of cash and at least half a dozen European officials. That went down as the World Cup wrapped up in Qatar. How did a teeny country with approximately none of the infrastructure needed to host an international sporting event come to host the World Cup? Bribes. And you don't have to take my word for it. The U.S. Justice Department said so itself in 2020. And lest you think Qatari corruption has yet to arrive stateside, Qatar was named in the bribery scheme that brought down New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez. Qatari terror finance is another major problem that could fill a monologue or two on its own. Bizarrely, successive U.S. administrations have trusted Qatar to broker hostage deals and host American troops. My 2 cents, our Qatar policy shouldn't be one of unconditional love. A reckoning is long overdue. Now for your headlines. Headline 1. The U.S. Treasury Department issued another round of Iran sanctions. But these aren't your typical oil sanctions. In partnership with the FBI, Treasury sanctioned 3 members of Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security who were involved in the abduction, detention, and probable death of FBI Special Agent Bob Levinson. Levinson was working as a private investigator when he disappeared after traveling to an island controlled by Iran. That was in March 2007. At the time, Levinson was looking into alleged corruption involving former Iranian President Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani. 18 years and a handful of days later, Levinson's whereabouts are still a mystery. He's presumed dead, but the U.S. government is still hammering at the case. The FBI is offering up to $5 million for information leading to his location, recovery, and return. The State Department's Rewards for Justice program is offering $20 million. Headline 2. The Trump administration handed Syria's new rulers a list of conditions they must meet to finally see some of those sanctions lifted. First, no foreign fighters can fill senior government positions. That one might be a problem since foreign fighters are already serving as high-ranking officials in Syria's defense ministry and as senior commanders in the new Syrian army. And if I may put on my Jonathan Schanzer hat and ask a question, what about foreign advisors? Turks are reportedly floating around those government offices in Damascus. Second, the Trump administration wants to see Syria's chemical weapons stores destroyed. Counterterrorism cooperation is a third condition. And finally, the administration wants Damascus to appoint a liaison to help locate American journalist Austin Tice, who went missing in Syria in 2012. In return, Washington is offering partial sanctions relief. That's something that Syria's new leaders have been pushing for since day one. Syrian officials reportedly received the list of Washington's demands earlier in March on the sidelines of a Syria donor conference in Brussels. And headline 3, anti-Hamas protests erupted in Gaza yesterday. Hundreds of Palestinians flooded the streets in northern Gaza. Their demands? Hamas needs to go and the war needs to end. Clips of the demonstrations circulated online in which protesters can be heard chanting things like, "Out, out Hamas," and we want to live in peace and security. I think we'd all like to see both those messages realized. And here's something interesting. Some of the protesters threw in chants against pro-Hamas journalists and media networks. Suspect number one is Al Jazeera, you know, the Qatari network that's been spewing Hamas propaganda and employing Hamas terrorists. Just this week, the IDF announced that a Hamas sniper who moonlit as an Al Jazeera journalist was killed in an Israeli airstrike. Tell me a network is rotten without telling me it's rotten. All right, it's time to press play on that interview with former Beverly Hills Mayor John Mirisch. He has plenty to say about the terror-sponsoring regime in Doha, and as you probably know by now, so does our very own Jonathan Schanzer. The two Johns caught up last week for a fascinating discussion exposing Qatar's far-reaching influence, so sit back, relax, and have a listen.
Welcome to the program, John Mirisch.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's start with this. You're the former mayor of Beverly Hills. You're now on the city council, and you have been very alarmed about the activities of the Gulf Emirate of Qatar in your city, in your state, in this country. Why?
Well, first of all, let me just clarify. In California, we have a kind of a unique system. There are 5 council members, and we take turns as being mayor. So I've been mayor 3 times. I'm now just a garden variety council member. But we're also one of the few Jewish majority cities outside of Israel. I think Boca Raton, Lakewood, New Jersey may be the other 2. And so we have always been at the forefront of promoting a relationship with Israel, combating anti-Semitism and that sort of thing. We're actually, in September, we're going to be celebrating a 10-year anniversary of an MOU with the state of Israel and the city of Beverly Hills. We have a sister city in Israel, Herzliya. But about 2 years ago, I got an email from Benjamin Weinthal from the Jerusalem Post saying, did you know that the Mayborn Hotel in the middle of Beverly Hills is owned by the Qatari royal family, HBJ and HBK? And did you know what Qatar was doing? And did you know what these people have personally said? Anti-Semitic statements and that sort of thing. And my response was, no, I did not know. And so I did some digging, and you don't need to dig very far to see what is happening. In addition to the Mayborn Hotel in our town, the Qatari consulate for the Western states is in Beverly Hills. So the more I found out, the more I was incensed. And basically for the past year and a half, and this again, my digging into it predates October 7th. I've said at the end of each Beverly Hills City Council meeting, a la Cato the Elder, you could say, that furthermore, I propose that we designate Qatar a state sponsor of terrorism, that we sanction Qatar, that we freeze its assets and use them to compensate the victims of Qatar-funded terrorism, and that we ask the State Department to expel the Qatari consulate from the city of Beverly Hills because terrorist supporters and Jew-hating racists are not welcome in our city.
I'm going to guess that you're probably not getting to a lot of invited to a lot of parties in Doha right now. I appreciate your stance, and I think it aligns very much with mine. But let's dig in for just a minute, because I want to ask you about, how to start doing this at a local level, at a state level, at the federal level, to try to combat a malign actor that is throwing tens of billions, probably hundreds of billions of dollars into our economy. Many people would say, well, that's a good thing, right? Let's let these wealthy people flood our system with money because, well, we want money. We want to improve the economics of our city, right? Or our state or the federal government, right? So let's start with what you think you can do in Beverly Hills beyond, the sort of basics. I mean, I don't think that the State Department's going to kick the consulate out so long as they're a major non-NATO ally. So what are the interim steps you might want to think about?
Probably not. And you're right about, people like the tax from the hotel. The hotel tax is one of our major sources of revenue in the city. But as I've said, there are certain things that are more important than hotel tax. And in this case, it isn't even close. It's Israel. It's our relationship with Israel. It's supporting democracy and all of that. We're just one voice. And I will say that I think I've noted that in the past year and a half, in social media and online, there have been more people who are more and more loudly becoming critical of Qatar. And this is something that clearly they don't want, they're not interested in. And so I think all of us raising our voices in whatever way we can is something that can contribute to hopefully eventually having a loud enough critical mass that causes people who are in the decision-making positions to rethink things. We have actually, along with local rabbis here, Rabbi Pini Dunner of Young Israel of Beverly Hills, have had regular protests in front of the Mayborn Hotel, holding signs and letting people know about it. We've had protests in front of, there's a palatial mansion that HBJ owns in Bel Air. It's probably hardly ever there, that we've also protested at. So it's raising consciousness is what we can do, I think, and having these discussions and being very open about it. And Qatar, as we know, has sort of positioned itself as this honest broker. Everyone, or a lot of people, are talking about Iran and have been for a long time, and how they are part of a malign axis. And now, more recently, Turkey. Interesting developments there. But yes, not as many people in the past have been talking about Qatar because of the money. And in fact, they've used their wealth and they've used the distribution of their wealth to burnish their image and blunt criticism. But the money comes with strings attached, as we see with the billions of dollars that they have poured into our university systems, and we see what the consequences are. And I think it was just exposed the other day that it's not just universities. Through Brown, they have been funding K through 12 education, which is skewed against Israel, and this is simply not acceptable.
Absolutely. And FDD's launching a new K through 12 program looking at exactly this problem. And I think a lot more needs to be learned, including about the influence of sovereign actors like the Qataris. But okay, you've given us a lot to chew on. Let me let's unpack this question of state level action. I'm assuming you work with folks at the state level. It's probably part of your job when you're working in municipal government. You've got to also, deal with the state. Do you think there's any appetite at the state level to address this? Have you found allies that you can work with? Or in the education system? I mean, University of California system is state funded, is it not?
Sure it is. And I mean, our battles there are with their inability or unwillingness up to now to crack down on-campus anti-Semitism. I will say that I am also the chief policy officer for a group that is called ICANN, the Israeli American Civic Action Network. And a lot of what we're doing now at the state level is fighting ethnic studies programs that are actually inimical to Jews, that are in some ways anti-Semitic, and that allow teachers unions that have a lot of DSA members and are very skewed against Israel to try and use our schools to indoctrinate and brainwash some of our kids in the K-12 level. So I would say that there probably aren't as many allies at the local level. California, obviously, we have basically a one-party state. We do talk to our Jewish caucus members, but ironically, in some cases, like with the ethnic studies programs, the Jewish caucus are behind what I and ICANN would consider to be bad ethnic studies, not allowing the Jews to tell our own stories, and that have in some cases also alienated other minorities. So I'm not looking for, I'd love to have all the allies that we can have at the local level. There are a few lawmakers we can work with, but really we're looking to Washington and to the feds to be able to actually do something. One of the things we very much also, ICANN has a few major foreign policy goals, and one is the expansion of the Abraham Accords. That is something that really clearly has to happen in Washington, and we're very supportive of it. I was in Washington last week for the National League of Cities, had a lot of meetings with congressional offices to discuss all of these issues. Obviously, another one of our foreign policy goals is to avoid a nuclear Iran, which is extremely a hot issue right now.
Yeah, I got to imagine you're probably one of the few city council members that are out there talking to folks on the Hill about these issues. I think it's great that you're doing it. It's one of the reasons why we're having you on the program right now. But so let's talk for a second about what can happen at a national level. I mean, right, so we've talked now municipal, the challenges that you have there and some of the things that are underway.
Mhm.
State, you're expressing some frustration. Federal, I mean, where would you like to see the U.S. government go as it relates primarily to the Qatar challenge that we've described here today?
Well, as said, I watched your podcast with Jonathan Conricus yesterday, and he raised the issue that we need to be putting pressure on Egypt when it comes to solutions, for example, to the hostage crisis. I have said this. There was a Hanukkah menorah lighting ceremony right across from the Mayborn Hotel on city property, where I sort of said that if HBJ and his royal family connections and the current emir would order Hamas to release the hostages, they would have been released months ago. So I think that we not only need to put pressure on Egypt by way of finding a longer term solution, we need to either put pressure on Qatar or sideline Qatar altogether. I read today on X a tweet by someone called Dan Linnaeus who suggested that it might not be such a bad idea if the Saudis and UAE actually took over Qatar, because Qatar really is a rogue state. I mean, that's not such a bad idea. But the problem is when Qatar is using their money on every single side of the aisle, they're using it to burnish their image, to blunt criticism. They're in cahoots with so many people in the administration, outside the administration. They're buying protection in a way. And we need to get beyond that. We need to get beyond that. And one of the ways of doing that is exposing all of the financial connections. I know that's something FDD is doing. It's something that MEMORY, the Middle Eastern Media Research Institute, is doing with a project they have called the Qatar Monitor. I wrote an article for them a couple of weeks ago called Qatar for Beginners, the evil regime behind Al Jazeera. It means also dealing with Al Jazeera as well, which I argued then should be forced to register as a foreign agent under FARA, which the first Trump administration actually ordered them to do. They still haven't done it yet.
Yeah, that was AJ Plus, as it's known, the social media arm of Al Jazeera. But I think you're probably right that Al Jazeera itself should be identified as a foreign agent.
Yes.
Last question before I let you go. Obviously, we just passed Oscar season. You have a front row over there in Beverly Hills, and you've watched all of it. It wasn't pretty, a lot of it, as it relates to Israel and Gaza. What's your sense of what's going on in Hollywood right now?
Well, things have completely changed. I mean, Beverly Hills has been long associated with the film industry. And as said, Beverly Hills is one of the few Jewish majority cities out there. But things do seem to have changed. Some of you may have read about at the Oscar Museum, they didn't pay any homage to the Jewish pioneers who actually created Hollywood. That's since been changed. But it seems it's part of an overall trend. You look at the percentage of Jewish students that were in Ivy League schools before, and it's slowly and silently gone down. And there was a very interesting article by Jacob Savage called The Vanishing. I think it was in the Atlantic, I'm not sure. But it talks about all of this. And it's very interesting how, and distressing, how at the Oscars and the award ceremonies, you didn't see people wearing the yellow ribbon in support of the hostages. Quite the opposite. And so it's something that's of concern. And it's also another reason why I feel that we in Beverly Hills have to be very proactive about doing the right thing, about showing moral clarity, and about doing, for example, give you one example, is that recently the city council approved $500,000 for a permanent October 7th memorial, which we're planning to, we're in the process of getting submissions. And if anyone has any good ideas, we're looking for something like the Maya Lin that may come out of nowhere, who designed the Vietnam Memorial. It's going to be going at our Civic Center across the street from the 9/11 Memorial. So we as a city, I think we feel where there are other cities that are passing these pro-ceasefire resolutions that are misinformed, that are uninformed, that are disinformation in some cases. We feel it's important for us to take a leading role, and we will continue to do so. And but it does go to show you how, in some ways, the local level of government is extremely important.
It's crucial. It's
Let's
crucial.
not forget that some of the people who are elected to city councils go on to higher office.
Of course. Well, I'll make one suggestion. I think instead of putting it across from the 9/11 memorial, I think you should put it right across from the Qatari consulate in Beverly Hills. It's just my 2 cents. Anyway, we're going to need to leave it there. I want to thank you, John Mirisch, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. On the latest episode of FDD's Foreign Policy, my colleague Brad Bowman sat down with General Ronald Clark, the commander of U.S. Army Pacific, to discuss all things Indo-Pacific, which is the Chinese Communist Party's home turf. General Clark is essentially the top American soldier in the region, so he's the perfect person to explain to us why the Indo-Pacific matters and what the U.S. Army is doing out there to deter and defeat our adversaries. FDD's Matt Pottinger teamed up with Senator Todd Young of Indiana in a new piece for the Washington Post. Matt and Senator Young emphasize that federal investment in research and development is key to America's technological edge. The Chinese Communist Party is investing heavily in R&D, and we here in the United States need to keep up. That's how America will sustain tech dominance, win the artificial intelligence race, and maybe even put man on Mars. And finally, check out FDD resident scholar Reuel Mark Gurek's latest piece in National Review. He joined the Council on Foreign Relations' Ray Takei to reflect on the sorry state of Iranian politics. The Islamic Republic turned 46 years old in February, but Reuel and Ray tell us that Iran's rulers are forever young. While the Iranian people are growing disillusioned with the regime, the mullahs are clinging to their convictions. The Islamic Republic is at an impasse, and nukes may be the only option that the supreme leader has left. And that's enough for today, folks. If you're feeling the need for more smartness, check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD, or take a peek at our Instagram and YouTube channels. And please consider supporting our mission with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. We cannot do the work we do without the support of our incredible donors. Tune in Friday for what's sure to be another fascinating episode of the FDD Morning Brief. We'll keep tracking the latest out of the Middle East and bring you the best and brightest in 48 short hours to make sense of it all. Until then, I'm Natalie Ecanow, signing off for FDD.